Well, let's get started. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is Eric Hinton, and I am the director of the Rolling Center for Business Law and Leadership at the Dedman School of Law. But for most of my career, I've been an international lawyer where I've been involved in many aspects of international business law, including international education and also international practice in Brussels, Belgium. So I think it's an exciting time to be in international law. I also have the great honor of being the chair of the State Bar of Texas International Law Section. And we really are interested in hosting you today and sharing some of the information that we've acquired over our careers as international lawyers, and also answer those of your questions. Today's webinar will be facilitated by Josh Beker. He is the person on our council who handles outreach to university students, especially law students in the state of Texas. So we're pleased to have Josh here, as well as a number of our council members who will speak to many aspects of international business law. We hope to cover quite a few things as we go through today's topic. You should have received everyone's bio in advance, so you can learn about a little more about each of the panelists. We also will share information about our upcoming institute, as well as ways that you can receive complimentary admission to the State Bar of Texas International Law Section. So with that, I'm going to disappear and turn the time over to Josh. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Eric. Really appreciate it. I wanted to welcome everybody onto this webinar, both our panelists and our attendees. So thank you very much for joining. We're always happy to share with everybody and like to, I guess, get started. So I wanted to everybody does have all of our speakers' bios, but nonetheless, I just wanted to give a brief opportunity for everyone just to say hello, introduce themselves very briefly, and then we can get the ball rolling. Start with myself. I'm Josh Beker. I am a council member for the International Law Section of the State Bar of Texas. And in my day-to-day life, I practice international trade and customs law, basically handling import and export law, helping clients get their product from point A to point B. And that's me in a nutshell. Richard, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Richard Munoz. I am the Assistant General Counsel and Privacy Officer for Buckner International. We're a nonprofit organization that does children and family services in 6 countries, as well as Texas. And my day-to-day is kind of the same way. It's just spread out over, like I said, 6 countries for just all kinds of in-house things that occur.
Great. Thanks a bunch. And David, can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks very much for the invitation. Happy to be here. My name is David Weiss. I'm a partner at King & Spalding in Houston in the International Arbitration Group, where I'm involved in both commercial arbitrations, disputes between private corporations regarding international transactions, and then also investor state arbitration, which typically concerns disputes between a foreign investor and the government regarding a large investment in that country.
Wonderful, thank you. And Colin, could you please give us a brief introduction?
Sure, thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Colin Guiseppe. I'm an attorney at Haynes and Boone in the international practice group there. My practice focuses mostly on international corporate work and CFIUS national security reviews. I'm a council member of the International Law Section of the Texas State Bar. I chair the International Law Section of the Dallas Bar, and or vice chair of the International Law Section of the Dallas Bar, and chair the International Law Committee of the Miami-Dade Bar.
Great, thank you so much. And Ariel, could you please introduce yourself? Ariel, I believe.
Sorry.
There we go.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm Ariel Dulitzky. I'm the director of the Human Rights Clinic at the University of Texas Austin School of Law. I'm an international human rights lawyer. I work in several international organizations and human rights organizations as well. I'm a member of the Texas Bar International Committee on International Human Rights, serving in different organizations as well.
Wonderful, thank you. And Marissa, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Marissa Sandoval Rodriguez. I'm a partner at the law firm Caheaux, Cavazos, and Newton. I am in our McAllen, Texas office, so I'm in South Texas. And I primarily handle international business transactions, especially between the US and Mexico, going both ways. And also, I just wanted to add that I am also on the State Bar International Law section, and I am currently the treasurer. Thank you all.
Great, thank you. And John, if you could please give us a quick introduction. Oh, and John, you are muted right now.
How's that? Got it? Okay.
Perfect.
I'm John Vernon. I've been practicing for over 45 years as an international attorney in franchising, mergers and acquisitions, tax, just about every aspect of people and product moving cross-border. I also am on the faculty at SMU Law School. I've been teaching there for 18 years of international law in licensing, franchising, antitrust, and distribution. And I was former chair of the IBA International Human Rights Committee for a number of years, and also involved with the ABA International Committee and the Human Rights Committees there and the State Bar of Texas. So that's what I do most of the day.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much. So one of the reasons I actually wanted to go and have this quick little introduction to everybody is because I found to be a great segue to our first topic, which I believe is something that is on every student's mind these days, of what specifically is international law. As you heard, there's a very wide breadth of what we all do in our day-to-day. And, you know, as students, I'm sure you've already started to hear some of that, you know, be it from folks that go and talk about it from the most, from say that it doesn't really exist, right? All the way to the people on the other end who believe that it, exists so much that it's become so ingrained into our lives that we don't even recognize it. So one thing that I want to start our discussion with amongst our various panelists is, what is international law and what is it to you, right? So to me, in my field, I really look at it from one of two things, and this comes from a mix of both my educational background and my work background. I view international law as falling into two camps. The first is international business law, which is kind of what I do on my day-to-day, and I believe a few other folks do as well. And that's, how do I make things work between countries, between investors, between people? And the other is human rights law. That is, the war crimes tribunals, if you will, or helping folks that are under duress and forced labor situations in parts of the world, or what have you. So that's what it means to me personally. So I wanted to get the thoughts of some of our panelists on that, maybe. So Colin, if you could, just out of curiosity, what do you view as international law?
I think you summed it up. I would fall into that same camp of viewing it as more of a bifurcation between business and more of the human rights public interest aspect. Being a corporate practitioner, in my practice, it tends to come up mostly in the form of treaties or conventions and how those affect my clients and our private transactions on the business front. But the public policy and the human rights aspects, and more of the public interest aspects, definitely come into play. But I think that's a good way to look at it, more of a public aspect, and then a private aspect governing private transactions.
Yeah, I think I agree. And I think somebody like Marissa, for example, you would probably agree that even within just the client side, that international law could be two things. I presume in your day-to-day, you look at both the US law and Mexican law and kind of combine them and, advise a client accordingly on that. Is that right?
That's right. And so I think what makes our work unique is I'm not a Mexican lawyer, but I deal with a lot of Mexican transactions, right? So I have to have a good working knowledge of how things work over there in order to make a US transaction function over there, or in order to protect my US clients' interests in Mexico. And so I think it's a matter of like knowing, I mean, there's a lot of things, right? They go into it. Understanding the language, understanding the different legal systems, understanding different cultures, all of that goes into what we do every day. And if you just go in with your like American mindset, it's not necessarily going to work, right? So I think we have to have a broad, have an understanding of those different things that really affect our clients and our transactions.
Right. I think that's a good way of putting it because, I think you would agree that if you don't have that mindset properly, you end up on David's desk. Is that right? Yeah. So David, I guess just piggybacking over there a little bit. So, so somebody, who doesn't have Marissa's background comes over to you and ends up asking you to fix a situation. You'd use your expertise to kind of bridge that gap, right?
Sure, and it's interesting, hearing some of the other panelists, because I guess perhaps as a disputes lawyer, I think of international law a little bit differently, or at least when I was thinking about the question, the first would be: is your dispute, with a government, which is going to bring, in my field, going to bring up investor-state arbitration and treaties and basically public international law, and I really have enjoyed public international law, and I don't think a lot of people, there's not a lot of practices, there's some, but there's not a lot of practices in sort of big law, big disputes where you see public international law, the role of customary international law, the interpretation of treaties, and when you're in an arbitration, sometimes the procedure might be guided by public international law, citing to, soft, non-binding precedents from, say, the ICJ or even sometimes human rights tribunals. So to me, there's technically public international law, and then as a disputes lawyer, there's sort of this other area that I think of as private international law. You sometimes hear that more from civil law-based lawyers than U.S. lawyers, and from a U.S. law perspective, I think about all the times where U.S. law in a disputes context is dealing with an international issue. It could be extraterritorial application of U.S. law, the Act of State Doctrine, Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act, and there's a whole host of that. You have those issues under U.S. law, and then you have them under other laws. Every country has laws and rules that are dealing with these complex international issues. And I guess sort of related to that, I would think, even though it's not international law, technically, when I think about foreign law, I think about comparative law, civil law, as Marissa was, Mexican law, all the countries in Latin America, coming from a civil law tradition, Roman law base, as opposed to U.S. or English common law. So when I think of international law, that's sort of what I think of as public international law, private international law, and comparative foreign law.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Ariel, I see you've been nodding along quite aggressively with David's opinions there. So I guess, was there anything you kind of wanted to add to that? I guess add a little bit of your expertise into that.
Yeah, I agree with David on the broad aspects of what is international or public international law and how we have to deal with different issues and norms, and usually it's not as just treaties, but it's soft law, customary law. And when Marissa was talking about Mexico, there is a huge difference between the US and many other jurisdictions where you cannot practice law if you don't know international law. And for instance, in the case of Mexico, you cannot do constitutional law if you don't know international human rights law. So this is a huge difference in terms of how other countries use international law in a much more proactive way than we use it here in the US, and it's part of the domestic law. And if you want to be a good lawyer abroad, you need to know international law. And the other thing that I want to mention is that more and more there is a clear intersection between business and human rights, particularly with the UN Guiding Principles on Human Rights, where there are many new developments in terms of what corporations need to do in order to comply with international human rights law.
Yeah, I think that's very well put. And actually, it's also a great way for me to pose my next question. So thank you actually for doing that. And my next question was actually going to be I want folks to talk to some of the students about, what skills do you find to be the most important in your practice, and what should, a student who's interested in this field want to focus on? And John, I wanted to start with you on that, as you do teach as well as practice, and I wanted to hear a little bit of your thoughts on that. Oh, and John, if you don't mind, you are muted once again.
There we go. Yeah, I think that it's very, very important that you've got a firm grasp of contract law. You need to understand the tax regulations that apply. In my practice area, I structure deals, so I've got to understand what the corresponding jurisdictions are going to say about the type of transaction we're going to be looking at. And I think what I notice in teaching is that very few students really have business and financial backgrounds. And so there is a lot of work they need to do to be able to understand how this transaction is going to work. What do you want to get out of it at the end of the day? How are you going to have an exit strategy for it and not end up in David's office? And so those are the kinds of things that I go and I say, really have to think about your exit strategy first, get in there, but you also have to understand what the working pieces of the deal might be. And if you don't have that ability, find someone who does have the ability. I noticed the students in law school basically take courses for the bar, but they don't really look at what they're going to need to practice as a transactional lawyer. I find those that are guided by federal law, such as CPAs, those that were JAG officers, have a better understanding of international law than those that are just coming from a liberal arts background.
Gotcha. Well, thank you very much. And actually, I just wanted to make a quick comment. I forgot to mention this before. We are receiving your questions, and I'm saving a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. So please do keep them coming. I will generally keep them at the end. But if something comes up based on specifically what we are talking about at the moment, I would like to bring that up. But while we're over here, Richard, I was curious if you had any thoughts on, John's kind of opinions on, what skills the students need, and if you want to expand on some other things that you personally find helpful for yourself.
Sure, absolutely. I think number one, good listening skills. Now that sounds very, kind of a cop out, but you've got to be a good listener, because as Marissa pointed out and other panelists have pointed out, we are coming in from a different culture, right? We're coming in with our North American based American culture generally, and it's not always a one-to-one fit, but you need to understand what it is you're trying to do. And I love what John said, begin with the exit, begin with the end in mind, because whether you're doing a multi-billion-dollar deal or you're doing a small, you're trying to fund a small organization in Ghana, for example, you need to listen, because you don't want to come in and say, okay, I've got all the answers because I'm a lawyer, because no, your job is to listen, to figure out what your client needs, and to figure the most efficient way for them to get it. So I would say, above all, and I don't know if they can teach this, but it is a skill that needs to be developed, is learn to listen, learn to sit back and ask clients your questions. Say, when you say X, help me understand that, and really try to probe, because that will save you a lot of trips to David's office. It really, really will, I think, in the end.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. Yeah, I feel like we're ragging a little bit on David's office here, but hey, at least those folks who are maybe interested in arbitration here can gather really quickly that there's definitely business on that end, right? I think everybody's just about at some point alluded to ending up there. One question I get a lot from students when I was still in school and, a little afterwards, is kind of that little bridge there is, if I want to get into international law, do I need another foreign language? Do I need to understand languages or what have you? In my personal experience, it's only ever been helpful, but I don't know if it's something that is necessarily needed. And I know that that's something that some people, kind of sometimes, are a little hesitant about. David, did you, in your experience, do you find that to be an essential skill by any chance?
I don't think it's essential, and I know some very successful international arbitration practitioners who don't speak a foreign language, but I found it tremendously helpful. So for instance, in my instance, I speak Spanish and Portuguese, and most of my practice is in Latin America. And so being able to go down there and have meetings in that language to appreciate, where something might be getting lost in translation. We have very sophisticated, complex contracts and issues. Not everything's going to translate. Sometimes there's not even a word in English, or if it's a civil law country, they'll have legal concepts. The word doesn't even exist in English, so it's tremendously helpful. And then you might find other practitioners, in Africa or the Middle East that are speaking French or Arabic or what have you. But so I would say it's not critical, but it's extremely helpful.
Perfect, thanks. Yeah, and I just got a question from the audience that I think is also a good one for me to kind of move the question along. So somebody in our audience asked, what is the best approach for LLM students? I am a foreign trained attorney and currently waiting on my admission for the Texas bar. I'd like your view on how to get hired and pursue international law in the United States. So I actually wanted to discuss at some point, how did everybody get their start? What was it that, helped you the most? On our panel, does anybody actually have an LLM, out of curiosity? No, I didn't see. Oh, Ariel, you do. Yeah. Well, so why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I have an LLM, and probably I'm the only foreign lawyer here. I got my degree from Argentina. And let me start by saying something. My first name is Hebrew, my last name is Polish, but I was born in Argentina. In Latin America, everybody knows me as an Argentinian, and nobody likes Argentinians in Latin America. But when I moved to the state, I became a Latino or a Hispanic, changed my identity. And if you want, as well, Richard was saying, if you are willing to work with people crazy like me and with this multiplicity of identity, you need to be humble and you need to be ready to listen to people. And for me, if you don't speak another language, your international practice will be limited, particularly in public interest law, and particularly in human rights law. And I regret that there are many American lawyers who believe that with English, they can be international lawyers with not a problem at all, that replicates a very imperialistic approach. And I'm sorry to say that, but I'm a human rights lawyer. I'm not afraid of speaking truth to power. So I have an LLM. Why did I need an LLM? Because I knew that I wanted to stay in the States and I wouldn't be able to find a job here if I didn't have an American law degree. And the LLM was essential. So for me, it was an investment in my CV to have that. I decided also not to take the bar exam because I wanted to practice internationally and not domestically. And under many jurisdictions internationally, you don't need to be admitted to the US bar, any US bar, in order to practice that. I have my admissions in Argentina. The tricky part for a foreign lawyer, one, is that we are never going to be a native speaker, and that will be a challenge. Two, many big law will hire a foreign lawyer only for the potential businesses that they can bring, not for how smart they are. Three, they will believe that an LLM will be lesser caliber of a lawyer because it studied only 1 year rather than the 3 years of a JD. So I would say, yes, try to get it, try to apply, but most of the time, you are not going to be hired in the same way that American JDs are hired. So you need to be prepared to be flexible in how you search for a job. Most likely is going to be with law firms that have some practice or some businesses in the country or the region you are from. So these are my advices. Sorry that they took so long.
No, that's perfect because, I had some other questions in the chat here about specifically what kind of classes and what kind of internships and what have you. And I think in discussing something along the lines of you will be hired slightly differently and to look for firms that have offices where you're at, I think that's a good piece of note to maybe add when somebody's thinking about what internships they want to pursue. Personally, I fell into this field, honestly. I went to school with, a bit of an engineering background. So I thought that I would do, intellectual property law. With all due respect to my friends and everybody on this call who might do intellectual property law, I found it horribly boring. And I decided I would never be able to do it ever. And I, found an internship in international trade, and I've been there ever since. So personally, my opinion on internships is please absolutely go out, get one, get an internship, get an externship, get a law clerk position, whatever it is you want to call it, however you want to do it, do that. Because the most important thing that you can ever find out about your legal profession is, do I actually like this? And in my experience, there's only one way of doing that, right? I see a lot of nodding along from our panel. I don't actually know if our audience can see our entire panel at once. So if they can, apologies for reiterating what is visual, but that's just kind of one thing that I wanted to put in there as well. So I guess another question I think I hear a lot from students often is what is your average day like? What is your work-life balance? Maybe what skills from school did you really use? What is it that you as an international lawyer do? Who do you help? Who do you serve, for example? So Marissa, why don't you, I guess, if you don't mind, why don't you tell us a little bit about what your average day is like?
Sure. So I guess my average day, I mean, nowadays I get to the office and you're bombarded by emails, really. So you have to get through your inbox, and start dealing with things. So a lot of the work that I do is I help like US clients and individuals, customers, investors doing business in Mexico, and then a lot of Mexican clients and companies doing business here in the US. So I might help them with forming companies, negotiating, entering into contracts. So a lot of things I think are just follow up. And I think some of the probably the most important things, and not just for international law, but probably for any lawyer, is just your own discipline, your discipline to meet your deadlines, your discipline to, I guess the thing that I feel like I should have been told in law school was that there's just a lot of administrative things that go on in the legal practice that are not going to be in the bar, are not going to be, nobody teaches you, like having to do with your time, having to do with billing. At the end of the day, every law firm is a business, right? So it's certain things have to happen in a certain way. And I think seeing a law firm as a business and learning how to manage your some people do a lot more administrative work than others. I feel like in my firm, I've done a lot of that. Managing that with your billable work and with your client development and all those sorts of things that are expected of a lawyer, I think really help, so that's generally what I'd say. And I wanted to make a comment on the language issue that you mentioned, because in my experience, so my first language is English, my second language is Spanish. But I mean, even now, there's words I don't know in Spanish, and I might say it in English. And I just feel that a lot of times, like, you don't need to feel that you need to know that other language perfectly. The only way to really improve is to practice. And so if you practice, when I first started at this job, a lot of my clients were Mexican clients doing business here. And so I literally had an English to Spanish dictionary and Spanish to English dictionary at my desk. Before I would call a client, before I would write an email, I'd have to look up all these words on the dictionary. I'd write them down. I created my own little glossary of my frequently used terms, things like that. and you learn them. Like you continue to learn as a lawyer. It's not like you finish law school and you know everything.
Right. I mean,
So
that's what they say always, right? We practice law. Nobody here does law, right? None of us have ever finished learning law, right? We're always constantly practicing. And I think
right. And so I felt like, wow, I went to law school to learn what these words meant in English. Now I have to learn what they are in Spanish, right? So in order to communicate that to my clients. So I find that you don't have to master it. If it's your second language, people realize it's your second language. You don't have to speak like a native Spanish speaker or whatever the language is, right? It's not just like you wouldn't expect your clients to speak perfect English if they come from another country. They don't expect you to speak their language perfectly. So I don't think you should be shy about it. You should try, you should practice. And I feel that people appreciate when you try to speak their language, and I don't think they're critical. I think they appreciate the effort.
I think that's
Josh, can I just add one thing to that? It's kind of a humorous one, but adding on to what Marissa said, one of my first times I was dealing with a situation in one of our non-governmental entities that we have in Mexico. I go in there thinking, okay, I got this down. I'm bilingual, what have you. I start speaking to some clients about some things, and they're just kind of looking at me, and they're just kind of staring at me. And they did not speak Spanish. They spoke a form of Mayan that I had no idea even existed, to be honest, quite honest at the time. And so just again, learning to listen and not to think that, oh, I know everything, I'm the lawyer. That is something that, again, just to remember that even if you are fluent in a certain language, also be aware that there might be some dialects or other languages in that country that you had no idea were there and people use all the time. So
that is very good advice. Yes, definitely. Ariel.
For law students, I would say if you have 2 summers and you want to go on public international law, I would try to do 1 summer domestic in the US and 1 abroad. I would try to study abroad, particularly in a civil law, continental law country, to at least be exposed to a different legal system. I think that will be useful. And when you start practicing, I learned the hard way. One, you need to be a good lawyer regardless of where you are practicing. And that it means to understand what are the logical points of the law. And that mainly will be applicable across the board. If you harm somebody, you need to do something to repair that. And that will have different names, but the principle will be the same. So think as a lawyer, and but with an open mind. In terms of daily practice, I learned first I need to have breakfast before answering the emails from people on the other side of the world that they are already in the afternoon. They had time to think on all that. And when I wake up and check my email and get frustrated, don't answer the email at that time. That's a piece of advice that I learned the hard way. The second one is we Americans are used to be on our email the whole time and respond immediately. That's not the culture in many other countries. So be patient and understand the culture on how people react to our messages. And 3, for instance, in Latin America, WhatsApp is much more important than emails in many ways. So be aware that there are different ways of communicating with people that are not what we assume. And that is what Richard was saying about being able to listen and to observing and to learning.
No, I think that's very good advice, because you are correct. In my field, I have a lot of Latin American clients, but I also have, a lot of folks over in East Asia and what have you. And, eventually you do learn these things. And, one thing that I do like to tell a lot of students personally is to travel. You must travel. And I know that's very difficult in this day and age, when ever since everybody realized that Zoom and Teams can save you a lot of money. Marissa's right. This is a business at the end of the day. And, boy, they would like to not pay for our airfare and our hotels, traveling places, but you got to do it nonetheless. It's the only way that you can really, truly immerse yourself in in another country and learn those things, how to communicate. So one thing that I actually had a quick question on here in the chat, and maybe we should bring that up here, is what is considered transactional law, right? And I think as international attorneys, we get a wide breadth of that. So John, why don't you give us a little bit here on what you would consider transactional?
Well, in my practice, the way I look at it is that you've got litigation or dispute resolution, and then you have all the rest. And if it's compliance related, if it's anything involving contract, then it's going to be transactional. Anything's going to be negotiated, it's going to be transactional. And when we start looking at a project and trying to determine kind of what format, what type of contract we're going to use, we start discussing all of the ins and outs that we're going to need. And I always start with tax. So that leads me to all the other areas I need to go, putting entity charts together, putting all of the corresponding documents that are going to need to go with each of those entities, and approaching it that way. But that's when I think about transactional and transnational, it's contracts.
Perfect, thank you. Excuse me. And Colin, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
Sure. So when I think of, and I think just outside of the international context, the context this might apply domestically as well, I tend to look at law in three buckets. The litigation, where there's a dispute, and that's the central core of that practice. You have regulatory, where there might be some type of filing or some type of compliance component, and that's one of the practice areas that I work in is with the national security reviews. And then transactional, I think that's what the question was about, was transactional. And I agree, I think it's about something that's negotiated, a business question or a contract. And so that's a lot of time they complement each other. There can be components of more than one of those in a transaction. But from a pure transactional nature, I'd say it's a contract, it's something that's negotiated, it's business, not necessarily a dispute. And then sometimes you get this regulatory component that might straddle both of those. And that's something that I do with national security, for example. And tax is kind of a fun hybrid, because it can sometimes involve all three.
Right. Yeah. And in my experience, as a trade lawyer, it definitely can end up being all three. And in fact, sometimes not only can it be all three, I think an important skill that you can learn, and you will do with time, is learning what part of the three are you in and which one are you about to start creeping down towards. That way you can, steer a deal or steer a situation into that general area. So I think we're getting a little towards the end of our time right now, and I've noticed there are quite a bit of questions out here that I kind of wanted to address. But before I do that, I still wanted to bring up there's a combination of a few things that I really that I think we can knock out a few all in one go, and it's all skill-based questions. So we have a lot of folks talking about specific industries, specific skills, how we as attorneys keep abreast of all of that. So David, I kind of wanted to chat with you a little bit about that. In your practice, you inevitably see a lot of things. You see a wide variety of, be it products or businesses or, people involved in a whole bunch of things. How do you stay abreast of all of their issues, or do you just kind of learn them as they come up?
Certainly there's a lot of learning as a part of being involved in a dispute. So if it's a transaction, you have to learn the transaction and what happened and what went wrong and what have you. Or if it's a foreign investment, there's a whole 10-15 year history of the initial investment, getting approval, administrative law, dealing with the government, what went wrong. So there is a whole lot of learning during the dispute. So the damages, you're going to have the legal dispute, and then damages is going to introduce a whole host of other issues when you're trying to figure out, well, what would have happened but for the breach? This company would have done this and earned that much. And that does introduce all of, and again, somebody said it earlier, I was certainly a liberal arts, undergrad. And so I've had to learn all of this business and finance and accounting, as a part of the dispute. In terms of trying to keep abreast, to me, I think of that a little bit more in the context of business development. You're just trying to be aware of what's going on in the market, what's going on in the countries, trying to anticipate, where the disputes are going to arise and who the players might be, so that you can try and position yourself to have opportunities to pitch for the interesting work. And I find that incredibly challenging. It's certainly not something I learned in law school at all. So that's the way I tend to think about it.
Perfect. Thank you. No, I appreciate that. I think, from my personal experience also, one thing that is important to know, and I think a few folks have said it in multiple ways, maybe not in so many words, is you're never going to know everything. And I think knowing that you don't know everything is a very important tool to have. Knowing when to say, let me research that for you, is important. And so for one piece of advice that I'd like to give to everybody out there who's asking, what skills do I need, or what methods do I need to learn about this event, or what do I need to know about, this particular field? My answer would be, it's always good to know as much as you can, but you're never going to know everything. So the answer is know when to take a break, when to research it. If a client is starting to ask you questions that you don't know about, take a couple of hours to take a step back, learn a little bit about what it is you're talking about. Google is your friend. Really, that's really the best way that I think I could ever say something, because also the expectation that we know everything, it's not really that. Everybody knows we don't know everything. It would be impossible to know truly everything. So I guess now with us getting a little closer, I wanted to take some of these questions, either specifically or kind of combine a few of them. And I'm going to open this one up to the panel. Whoever wants to answer the question first, please go ahead. One of our questions was, can we go into detail about immigration law and immigration? Would immigration be included as human rights law? And I want to kind of also go ahead and combine that one with another very good question here of what challenges does the practice face for students considering international human rights law? I know there's a lot of, overlap between the two in immigration these days, between people concerned about the safety of the person, but also of the practitioner. So I wanted to know if anybody had any opinions on that or wanted to talk about that a little. Open it up. Or Ariel, you're going for that unmute button there, I think.
Richard wanted to go.
Okay, well.
Okay, I'm happy to defer to you, Ariel, but I will say that there were two things that came up recently, and as a shameless plug for the ILS podcast, which this section promotes, is we talked about Title 42 and how it intersects with international law and international human rights and some of the situations that some of these immigrants are facing at the southern border of the U.S. And then another one we talked about what happens when a foreign national is charged with a capital crime in Texas. And that happens quite a bit. And so those are two very interesting areas where immigration has a very profound effect on what happens to the client and some of the things that, while you might be a criminal lawyer, you need to understand that if you have a foreign national as a client, what you do, how you plead them out, what happens, what the scope of the crime is. There are resources available to you or to that client at least that can definitely intersect that. So to go back is where does immigration fit? It's adjacent. I would even think it's probably intersects with it quite a bit. But those are the things that one thing that I think we will all agree on is that, international law tends to be so broad that there were, like you said at the very beginning, it's two extremes. Either it's everywhere or it doesn't exist. and it's kind of one of the two sides of the same coin, right? But again, so I would say as far as those folks who are, if you are working on immigration or you're wanting to be an immigration lawyer, you will run into these situations that intersect international law that are not necessarily just here, U.S. based and what have you.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Anybody else want to take a stab at that, or should we move on to the next question? All right. Well, in that case, yeah, please go ahead.
I might add just one thing. A lot of times, and I think this is just a factor of if you watch the news and you're up to date on current events, you think you automatically associate immigration with human rights, and those two obviously go hand in hand. There is another important aspect of immigration. It's from a commercial context, and a lot of what we do, specifically with the deals that I work on, is if there's a foreign investor who wants to come to the U.S., maybe to work in the U.S., but not as an immigrant. And so I'm not an immigration specialist. That is very much a niche area. But there's also a very strong business practice from an immigration perspective, helping foreign nationals either move to the U.S. with the intent to stay here or come to the U.S. as investors or as temporary workers. And so there's another very, very large component to the immigration practice that is more of a commercial nature.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. So here's another question, kind of, again, want to combine a whole bunch. Are there any specific career sites for finding international law internships? I'll take a quick first stab here on behalf of Eric and the SMU Center as well. Your school will have opportunities listed on their website. I'm a graduate of South Texas College of Law. I know full well that we always had those as well. Another personal opinion that I have on that is go out and network, participate in competitions as students, what have you. You know, when I was in law school, I took part in the Clara Barton International Law Competition, which was a competition that focused on the law of armed conflict and how it applies in certain scenarios. It was hosted every year by the International Committee of the Red Cross at their DC headquarters. Fantastic opportunity. If you participate in something like that, you will meet students from around the world. You will meet practitioners from around the world who are there, be it coaching or, you know, judging, and, you know, you will make those connections, and from those connections are born, opportunities are born. And obviously that's my shameless plug for that competition that I do love, but other competitions exist the same way. There's other things that you can do through your school, outside even just the career center, that that would help. Anybody else had a similar opportunity or a similar experience in their school when they first started looking for positions that they would like to discuss?
Yeah, we have the same, and here at UT, and I would say exactly the same thing that you said, Josh. And personally, I always love to help students who want to pursue an international law career. And I'm sure that all the other panelists will be willing to help as well. I'm offering everybody, but I assume that we decided to spend an hour here is because we care about this amazing career path, and we are willing to help other students. So don't be afraid of approaching people. The worst case scenario is either they say they don't respond or they say no. Best case scenario, they will help you and give you advice and help you with potential opportunities. So networking.
Actually, Josh, I'm going to jump back in here just because I have one thought, and I share this one a lot. I think if you want a career in international law and international business law in particular, you have to be very intentional about it. Nobody, regardless of which law school you go to and what you study, is going to drive the train up in front of your house and say, get on, here's your path to an international law career. It just doesn't work that way. And so well, maybe it might for some of you, but my experience is that is not how it happens. So if you want to do it, you have to take risks, and you have to probably do things that you might not have considered, or maybe even that your law school isn't even aware of or prepared to teach you about. And some of that is doing internships. Some of it is international education. Some of it is learning other languages. Some of it is networking, including through the State Bar of Texas International Law section. But put your name out there and find opportunities to understand and become part of the international law community.
Yeah, David, please.
I just thought, I was waiting for the opportunity to point this out, but in terms of advice I would give to law students who are interested in international arbitration, at a minimum, the vast majority of our advocacy is writing as compared to, say, a trial lawyer. And by far the most important skill for a young lawyer is to be an excellent writer. And I can't recommend enough Brian Garner's 100 tips book. I mean, I try and read it once a year, and I've been practicing for 17 years. Don't assume that your writing can't get better. It's just, it is far and away the most important skill you need to succeed as an advocate in international law.
Completely agree. And John, I noticed you've got something you wanted to add.
Yeah, I'd also say that the ABA and the International Bar Association work very diligently, not only for writing contests, but they will waive the fees for law students to join sections and to attend conferences and things like that. So I would pay attention to those, because those are going to be the best networking opportunities you're going to have. And you can learn a lot about the various areas that you're interested in. I'd also say this: pick something you're passionate about. Don't waste time doing something that you really don't like. And so if you like it, you're passionate, you'll write about it, speak about it, get in front of industry leaders and become an expert in something. And it's not all that complicated. We all did it at one time. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, I think that's very good advice. And, I was going to save this for the end, but I mean, I just feel like this just keeps coming up. So I'm just going to go ahead and make a quick shameless plug for the international law section here, everybody. So the international law section, much like the other sections we have all discussed here, do in fact allow law students to join for free. I would highly recommend doing so. You can do so by going to our website, which is ilstexas.org. Once again, that is ilstexas.org. We do waive the fee for students who are interested in joining us. And along with that comes, on top of a network of established practitioners who are part of this, you get access to our annual newsletter, our quarterly, more, I guess, I don't want to say more professional newsletter, because it's all kind of fairly professional, but, more academic newsletter perhaps is a better way of describing it. You get access to various events and such that we hold, such as, for example, the 32nd Annual Institute, April 19th and 20th over at SMU. I highly recommend anybody who is in or near the Dallas area to please attend that event. There will also be a mixer beforehand. We've got great speakers for it. I believe our keynote speaker is former U.S. Senator and NATO Representative Kay Bailey Hutchinson. So she will be there, giving an address. So yeah, I agree. Go to those events, go to things like that, meet people in the field, talk to people in the field, understand what is important to you, what is it that you would like to get out of the field, and see if that's something for you. From there, my other recommendation would obviously be, if you have the opportunity to do an internship, take that internship, see, because, a lot of folks have in their mind, what this field might be, and that might not be the case, or that specific section of that field might not be the case. And the only way you can really learn that is by doing. And John also mentioned conferences. I think one thing that, if somebody had told me as a law student to attend conferences, my first thought would have been, I don't know, FedSox conference, or, some law organization's conference. attend the business conferences, like whatever field it is that you're working in, I mean, I just as an example from my experience, attend the conference for compliance professionals or for customs brokers and freight forwarders, because, they may not know that they need to hire somebody that moment. They may not know to post a position on a, law school's job board, but they need someone, and the best way that they can find somebody is by you being there. So that's my recommendation there. I just want to quickly see, unless I'm going to open the floor really quickly to the panelists, see if there's anything else, but I'm going to take a quick look at some more questions and see if there's anything we wanted to address. I think we have actually covered just about everything in particular. So I guess I will open it up to the floor of students. If you can, please, we've got a couple minutes here before we have to go. So we've probably got time for about one more question. So if somebody wants to hammer one out real quick, we'll be happy to answer it live here. Where would you recommend applying for internships? Are there any specific forms in the Houston area? I've struggled to find anything that is not related to NGO asylum work. Email me. I'm in the Houston area. I can point you in the right direction. David, I'm sure you'd be happy to assist somebody as well. I know you are in the Houston area. My answer is, when it comes to, especially if you're looking in a specific area, network, talk to people in that area. We can help you out.
Yeah, sorry, my internet froze for a second. I didn't get the question.
Oh, no problem. Somebody was asking where to apply for internships in the Houston area. So my recommendation was reach out to practitioners in that area. Even if we can't help you immediately ourselves, we can probably know somebody who's looking to get some help.
Yeah, so at least in international arbitration, I don't know of any in Houston. I mean, the classic ones in international arbitration would be the ICC in Paris or ICSID in Washington, D.C. Sometimes there might be stuff in New York related to the UN, but those are the ones that I sort of immediately see, and those are the ones I see on resumes.
Sure. Oh, I guess I will also throw LinkedIn out there. There are a lot of folks that post openings on LinkedIn. Of course, the downside of LinkedIn is that you need to have established that network first, but it is there and available as well. Josh,
I'd like to add just briefly that in international law, you in many cases need to go where the job is, right? And so a lot of students maybe want to be near where their law school was, or maybe their family. That's great. But there are certain hubs of international law that happen, and it might be The Hague, it might be Geneva, it might be New York, might be Washington, DC actually for regulatory, it might be Houston or otherwise. But if you truly want to follow a certain type of international law, you're probably going to need to go where the jobs and the opportunities are.
Absolutely. I think that's great advice.
And I might just add, on the corporate side, if you're looking at private practice, search out, you can do some research, find a firm that has a strong international presence, look at the rankings, and if you're looking to get specifically into big law, apply to those firms, and note, I think Eric said earlier, be intentional. Be intentional about finding a practice group and expressing interest in that particular practice group because of their international work.
John, please.
Yeah, the other thing is I've noticed a number of my students have gone into large global accounting firms as lawyers, and they're working on amazing deals. And then from that platform, they jump into big law. And so don't write off the accounting firms because they are hiring more and more lawyers. And they're not necessarily tax lawyers. They're just hiring more lawyers in order to, in other countries, except for the US, the accounting firms and the law firms can share revenue. And so they end up practicing law for some of the largest law firms in the world, but they're accounting firms like EY. So keep that, and I'll echo this. Number of people that I've worked with, law students that I've had, have, like, for instance, 2 folks got internships at The Hague, and they now do global arbitrations for large law firms out of Houston. And I would also say that if there's an opportunity, someone said this before, to go somewhere and you have the ability to do it, go to that foreign office to work, because not everybody has the capability of picking up and leaving and going to Dubai, for instance. But once you've done that, then that opens doors that you normally wouldn't have. And I've two former students that did that with large firms, and they absolutely they moved to like 3 different cities, worked on huge deals they never would have worked on if they had gone to Houston or Dallas. So add that.
I think that's perfect. Thank you very much. And I don't know if anybody had any closing statements that we make. I noticed we're up on time. So personally, I wanted to thank all the panelists, of course, for your time. Thank you all for all of the attendees who joined. We're very happy to speak to you all, very happy to meet you all. And we're very glad that you're interested in the field. With that, at least for myself personally, that's you, and I leave it up to everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.